Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we're having a look at another devblog, and this is for the USS Cleveland. The USS Cleveland is going to be coming to the top ranks of the US tech tree, and it's going to be at rank 4, it's going to just be before the Brooklyn, and it's also a light cruiser. This one shares a lot of very similar attributes to the Brooklyn. It's slightly different in certain ways, but as always the Helena exists to be better. So the history of the Cleveland is pretty simple. In 1938, the US was looking to expand their navy, as they were doing during the 30s and mainly during the 40s, and they decided that they wanted to create 2 new 6,000-ton light cruisers. They were ordered, the specifications complied with the restrictions of the Second London Naval Treaty, and in 1939 the design was revised. It had its displacement increased to 8,000 tons, and the general layout was resembling a more compact Brooklyn-class cruiser. The plans were made for the construction of around 20 of these ships of the class, and the outbreak of World War II happened, of course, in September 1939, so these plans are actually expanded to 52 ships, and the design of the vessel had its displacement significantly increased once again. The restrictions from previous treaties were no longer being taken into account, what a surprise, and in reality, 27 Cleveland-class cruisers would end up being built, with another 9 being converted into light aircraft carriers of the Independence class. Now, the USS Cleveland, which is the lead ship of the class, which is the one that we're getting in the game, it was laid down in July of 1940 and saw completion in 1942 of June, so it took about 2 years. When she was officially commissioned into service with the United States Navy in 1942, the USS Cleveland's first mission involved providing fire support to Allied troops landing in Morocco in October of the same year. And shortly after, the USS Cleveland set course for the Pacific Theater in December, where the ship would serve until the end of World War II. The USS Cleveland took part in many operations during her service career. The more notable engagements with the enemy was the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, where the Cleveland, along with some other of her sister ships, successfully defeated a Japanese task force which was bound to attack US forces stationed in Bougainville, and during a defensive night battle nonetheless. And during the battle, the Cleveland-class cruiser proved the effectiveness of their advanced fire control systems and showcased the class's versatility, dealing large damage to both the Japanese surface vehicles as well as aircraft. And then following the end of the hostilities in 1945, the USS Cleveland was briefly part of an Allied occupation force in Japan, and then it sailed back to the US in December of that year. Following a brief overhaul in January, the USS Cleveland was decommissioned in 1946 and put into reserve in 1947. And in 1960, it was sold to scrap, marking the end of the service career for the Cleveland. But in-game, obviously, it lives on, which is one of the wonderful things about War Thunder. The fact that a lot of these machines are allowed to live on in a pretty interesting and cool way, instead of just being left in just parts or figments of history. So, what does this thing encompass? This thing is probably the closest idea that we have in-game to a Brooklyn-class cruiser. Obviously, we have the Brooklyn, and also we have the Helena, which is its own type of cruiser, the Helena class, which is a subclass of the Brooklyn. So why not have another class, the Cleveland class, which is like that as well? So what it has on the USS Cleveland is it has a slightly different main armament though. Even though it looks pretty similar, it loses one of its 6.6-inch primary gun batteries, and it replaces that with some of the other guns. So instead of having massive firepower over the whole ship compared to the Brooklyn, it pretty much takes some away in the form of adding some AA armament. So it has one less 6.6-inch stack, and then it has 2 additional 5-inch dual multi-purpose turrets. So this pretty much means that it will have, still a crazy fire rate on its main guns. It will still have a ton of secondaries to be able to deal with surface or air targets, but its main armament will be slightly worse. this compared to the ship that is at the same BR as it, the Brooklyn. And one thing that is really nice about all of these light cruisers from the Americans is their fire rate on their main guns is so nice. It pretty much means that you can just keep firing salvo after salvo at the enemy. But one thing that at least this machine is lacking is torpedoes. Torpedoes don't exist on this, which is kind of sad. Basically means that you are limited to just being a gun battery, and most of the time that's okay, but at least for me, after playing a lot of the the Japanese stuff in the form of destroyers and cruisers, I've generally liked the fact that it's been nice being able to just kind of shoot stuff with, torpedoes and taking them out from long range. Another thing to also add is this machine has 4 dual sets of 40mm as well as 13 single 20mm to back up the 5-inch guns. And the 5-inch guns are, as we said, multi-purpose. They don't just fire some SAP, instead they also fire HEVT. So good luck, just like every other cruiser in game, getting close to it with a plane, unless it is a very specific plane, which is actually flown a very, very specific way. So pretty much you have another machine for the Americans, which is just a massive gun battery. And when I compare this to something like the HMS York, which was just added for the British, it definitely makes me a little bit depressed and shows the difference when it comes to these general machines. America now, at its top tier, has 3 light cruisers in the form of the Helena, the Brooklyn, and also the Cleveland, which are incredibly good vehicles. And then that's not even including their heavies that they have, the Pensacola, which is just kind of sat there and not as good as its light cruiser counterparts. And it's going to be interesting because they said earlier in the year that stuff like battle cruisers were going to be added this year. I'm wondering which nations are going to get it first. And in my opinion, well, it's probably going to be America, isn't it? And also it would be nice to see a British one, but well, we'll have to see in the future. There are some other changes, though, when it comes to comparing it to the Brooklyn, which is probably the easiest comparison. The protection and the mobility is, well, kind of different, but not really. It has the identical propulsion system and also identical armor layouts. So there are very slight differences with the armor layouts, but not hugely. Basically, the armor layout comes down to where the ammunition is stored, and it's something that I showed on the dev server, so if you are interested in that, you can actually go and have a look. But one of the big differences compared to a lot of the other American machines is the amount of crew that this thing has. This thing has 1,255 sailors, and one of the things that it's a comparison, but it's probably not the best comparison, but it's easy to make. The fact is, if you have a look at the crew complement on a lot of the ships, you can kind of see them as crew, as kind of hit points in a way. Because once you get under a certain amount, you're not able to repair, you're not able to extinguish fires, and you know for a fact that you're going down. So seeing the crew point as kind of hit points in a way is probably a decent way of looking at it, if not, truly fully logical. So the fact is, with more crew means that you are way more survivable. And since this thing has like 400 crew more than a lot of other machines at the same level, shows that it's going to be a lot more survivable than them. There are still machines out there which have way more crew than this. The Eugen, I believe, is around 1,700, which makes it hard to annihilate because it can just keep repairing and keep just throwing crew into the wind. So yeah, the fact is, this machine is going to be as fast as a Brooklyn. It's going to be pretty much as well armored as a Brooklyn. It's going to have slightly worse firepower and the main battery as a Brooklyn, but slightly more as a secondary. What I'm really saying is, if you are interested in this machine and you think it is an awesome idea, you might as well just play the Helena, because the Helena is the Brooklyn, but with more AA support. because the fact is, when we have a look at premiums and stuff in naval, there's this weird idea that naval premiums are just better than their tech tree counterparts, and that is carried over with the Helena, and is actually an idea which is kind of being squashed as well at the same time with some of the new premiums. If you have a look at the Spokojny and also the new Trashemy, the Spokojny is actually a better version of the new Trashemy at the same BR, and I'm very happy to see the ideas generally changing. I don't like the fact that premium vehicles should just be better versions of their tech tree counterparts. It just seems like that is the key definition of paying for power. And with the Cleveland class being added, and with the Helena already existing, it's hard to even say, you know, go ahead and enjoy the Cleveland. I suppose if you don't want to pay for the Helena, then, you know, you have the Cleveland and the Brooklyn there. And also remember, soon we'll probably be having some summer sales, so maybe worth looking out for stuff. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Eugene's Terry, and also Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.